Right, what are you even saying? Like peace has always come from the east? Are you insane? There was nothing good that ever came from the Soviet Union.
That would not have happened if it weren't for the rhetoric of hatred coming from Mr. Fico and the likes of him.
I mean, are you serious? Is this how Russian spies actually look? You would expect this guy to want your change at a shopping center. We're talking about the biggest oligarch that the country has ever seen, and the oligarch calls you the boss.
Like the Russian president, he portrays himself as a tough outdoorsman.
You cannot give off a strongman vibe when you're not a strongman. Hello everyone, this is Jan with Balls, and as you can probably see, today we're trying out something a bit different. Specifically, we are trying a new video format. What I want to do with you guys today is a sort of commentary / reaction style video. We're going to be watching a documentary recently released by Al Jazeera that focuses on the current political events in Slovakia, which is, as you know, one of the 4 countries that Balls mainly focuses on. And by doing a new video format, I want to give you guys an opportunity to see content that is not so heavily scripted as the videos that I usually do on this channel. And who knows, you might like this style of video better. In any case, let me know in the comments what you guys think, and let's dive in. So at the beginning, to understand the complexities of today's Slovakia, we actually have to go back a few years, specifically to February of 2018, where a tragic accident, or incident rather, shook up the entire country. And I would not be afraid to say that this incident dictates the societal and political events of Slovakia until this day. Let's watch together.
On the 25th of February 2018, the bodies of investigative reporter Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Krasnierova were discovered in their apartment, each bearing the hallmark single-shot wounds of an assassin. When both victims failed to answer their phones, their families grew anxious.
Tak ja som jej vo štvrtok volala, nedvíhala, písala som jej SMS-ku, nereagovala, som jej napísala: Martina, čo sa neozývaš? Stalo sa niečo, hnevaš sa na mňa?
Then came the crushing news that both Jan and Martina had been murdered.
Right, before we continue, obviously a very tragic incident that is key to understand the context of today's Slovakia. An investigative journalist, Jan Kuciak, was murdered together with his fiancée in February 2018, and it was suspected that the murder took place because of the articles that he had been working on. Specifically, Kuciak had been working on a large story covering the possible links of the Italian mafia to the Slovak government, which was very likely enabling, if not actively participating in criminal acts and large-scale corruption in Slovakia. So obviously, because that article had been in the works by the unfortunately murdered journalist, the first suspicion fell onto the Italian mafia. Let's continue watching.
I mean, that exposed the whole cesspool of crime, corruption. It was just very, very ugly.
This murder changed everything. Maybe we realized that it could be much more dangerous than we thought.
Kuciak, in his investigation, was looking into an apparent link between Maria Troskova, a former personal assistant of Fico, and an Italian businessman believed to be part of the 'Drangheta mafia, one of the most brutal crime syndicates in the world.
Right, so let's stop here for a second. As you can see, the allegations of links to the Slovak government were actually running up quite high. Specifically, they pertained to the personal assistant of PM Fico himself. PM Fico is now serving his 4th term in office as Prime Minister of Slovakia, but he had been in office before, and he was the Prime Minister of Slovakia when the tragic incident happened. And Jan Kuciak actually uncovered possible links to the, let's say, the closest inner circle of the Prime Minister himself. Now, before we continue, one small disclaimer that I forgot to mention. If you have a feeling that the video is slightly faster than would be usual, it's you're not mistaken. I had to speed it up a bit because the narrator in the original speed is unbearably slow. So excuse me if some of the other people in the documentary come off as a bit faster than would be normal, but I hope you can forgive me. The narrator would be unbearable in a normal speed. But let's continue. It gets even more interesting.
This story, it's just been finished at the time when he was murdered.
Kuciak's report, which was published posthumously, alleged that Troskova's former business partner was a senior figure in the mafia. Troskova denied she was linked to the mafia.
In these first days, everybody was thinking that behind the murder is somebody from this Italian mafia. It really hits Fico hard.
Months of protests brought the country to a standstill and forced Fico to resign.
Right. Now, this is key for the entire country, and I would even say for the region that I like to call the heart of Europe, because the protests that Slovakia saw after the murder were really massive for Slovak standards. It was the biggest protest, or a series of protests after the Velvet Revolution of '89 that brought down communism. More than, I think, 60,000 people attended those protests. And it actually forced Fico to step down. Now, consider this. Fico was not your usual prime minister of a European country. He was basically unquestioned in his power. At one point, he actually governed on his own. He formed a single-party government in a proportionate system, which is highly unusual. But you know, his popularity was basically so high that he won the absolute majority of votes in absolutely fair and free elections that Slovakia held and largely still holds. And he still managed to be the only party in government. So that just gives you the context and the extent of his power grab. But still, he was forced to step down by those massive protests. Now, let's actually jump to the beginning of the documentary. This was just to give you the context of who Fico is and why he was forced to step down. But what I'm trying to say and show you guys by beginning this video at the end of the documentary is actually that Fico didn't want to leave power. He was merely forced to step down by the allegations and the strong convictions that actually Kuciak was at least partly murdered because of the links of the mafia with Fico's own government, and because of the degree that the mafia and organized crime in general captured Slovakia as a state. So that then largely dictates how Fico has behaved ever since. Let's continue.
And forced Fico to resign.
Preto som dnes navštívil prezidenta republiky spoločne s koaličnými partnermi a ponúkol som mu, že na vyriešenie politickej krízy som ako predseda vlády pripravený podať demisiu.
5 months after the killings, the assassins were caught. One of whom said they'd been paid to kill Kuciak by the intermediary of a powerful oligarch called Marian Kochner. Kochner owned the flat next door to Fico's on the 4th floor of this exclusive residential building in Bratislava.
Now, this is also absolutely key to understand Slovakia, because while it was originally thought that the Italian mafia was actually behind the killing of Kuciak and his fiancée, it later came to light that it was Slovakia's own homebrew oligarch, Marian Kochner, that was most likely behind the act. Now, it would take us at least 2 separate videos to describe who Kochner actually is and what he has been accused of in the past. But for this purpose, it suffices to say that he has been one of the most well-known oligarchs in Slovakia. And whenever you say Slovak oligarch, Kočner is basically the one that comes to mind. Now, Fico has obviously declined that he had known Kočner, but as fate would have it, those two actually shared the luxurious apartment building called Bonaparte, and they were neighbors in this apartment building. And Kočner himself later attested that he was actually on first name basis with Fico himself. So, we might never know for certain. Maybe they were not friends in the true sense of the word, but at least they must have known each other because they were freaking neighbors in that building, which was one of the most exclusive buildings in Slovakia. Apartment buildings, that is. Continue watching.
Questions were then raised based on what emerged from Kočner's criminal trial. Critics pointed to apparently incriminating phone data.
Officially, Fico is saying that he didn't know him, but then the data we have from the Kočner's phone is that at least Kočner was telling other people that he was meeting him in the garage of that building.
When Kočner was talking about Fico with another person in his contact, he called Fico like boss.
Right, so you claim you don't know him. We're talking about the biggest oligarch that the country has ever seen, and the oligarch calls you the boss in his personal conversations that he thought would never surface to light and were only discovered when the police started to investigate the murder of Kuciak and his fiancée. He called Fico, the prime minister of Slovakia, the boss, for freaking sake. So, again, not incriminating maybe, we're not naming any names, but you don't call anyone the boss. You're not with on a first name basis with someone when you don't know them, which again Fico claimed the entire time. He claimed he never knew Kočner at all, and then this comes to light. So we don't know. We don't know for certain, but there's one more thing you should know about Slovakia, right? And the one thing that you should know is this. Fico actually paid a suspiciously low rent for being able to live in one of the most exclusive places in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, and he himself acknowledged how much he reportedly paid to be able to stay there. Watch this. Watch how the apartment looked once he had moved out and the apartment was offered up in an auction. Okay, sure, all the furniture is now gone, but you can see the style, you can see the size, you can see the floors the apartment had, and brace yourselves. The apartment had over 377 square meters, which for my American friends who sometimes watch this channel is really a lot of square meters. That's not your usual apartment that you would buy to stay there with your family and two kids. So it's a huge apartment, and he claims that he paid only 2,600 euros in rent. Now, that was in 2012, and sure, for 2012 that was a lot for rent in Bratislava, but probably not for an apartment of nearly 400 square meters plus two terraces, which had over 100 meters in total on top of this. And it was later claimed by Kočner himself, once he had been arrested, that this apartment was actually given to Fico as a gift for his services to organized crime. And because obviously you cannot claim openly that such a large apartment is the property of a sitting prime minister, it was officially the property of yet another criminal who had been convicted of tax fraud onto the Slovak state, which was also the reason why this apartment was then auctioned off and later sold to a Czech businessman in the auction, because it was not officially the property of Fico, so basically the state later sold it off. But this just gives you the picture. So the prime minister, at the very least, was was able to use such a huge apartment building at a really low cost, probably even at no cost if the allegations that he owned the flat were true, which we'll never know for certain, maybe. And it just gives you the context of how much organized crime was at least close to the Slovak government. Now, this all was just to paint a picture of what brought Fico down. What was the source of the large-scale protests that erupted after the murder of Jan Kuciak? Because Jan Kuciak, let's remind yourselves, was the one trying to uncover those deep-seated links between organized crime groups and the Slovak government, and that was also the reason why he had been murdered. Most likely by someone who called the sitting prime minister the boss. Now, to continue, we have to jump back to the beginning of the documentary, and so let's do just that.
60,000 Slovaks filled the capital's main square. They were the largest demonstrations since the fall of communism in 1989. Someone who was at both protests is actor Milan Kňažko, one of the leaders of the Velvet Revolution.
Medzi protestami novembra 89 a po vražde Kuciaka sú niektoré paralely. Ľudia chceli zmenu. Ľudia chceli predčasné voľby. Heslá boli dosť bolo Fica, spravodlivosť pre všetkých, rovnosť pred zákonom a tak ďalej.
Back then, it seemed inconceivable that Slovakia's populist hardman could make a comeback.
Right. As I said, the protests were massive, and it was very unlikely that SMED, the party of Robert Fico, would ever be able to recover. At one point, the polls even showed that SMED would only get around 8% of the vote if an election were held after the protests.
Last year, the country's general prosecutor, another powerful pro-Kremlin figure, suddenly cancelled all charges against Fico, to the outrage of his opponents.
It seems that the Prosecutor General might be a bit, biased when it comes to certain actors.
Right. We'll get to the part of the Prosecutor General being reportedly being a pro-Kremlin voice, but for now, let's just stop at his role and how he interfered in the prosecutions against Fico. Now, yes, Slovakia is on paper a democratic state where rule of law reigns supreme. Slovakia is a full-fledged member of the EU and NATO, but the Prosecutor General has disproportionately large powers. And the main power that he has used to help Fico and also criminal organizations is a paragraph in the criminal code that basically enables the Prosecutor General to stop any ongoing investigation against anyone, including the Prime Minister, if the Prime Minister is being prosecuted, of course, until the case gets to court. So basically at any point for basically, complicated procedural reasons, but with little to no explanation, the Prosecutor General can just put a stop into investigations. And as you probably can tell, this is a powerful tool that a Prosecutor General can use to help his friends. And he has done so in the case of Fico.
So you have a Prosecutor General here who effectively pardons the most important pro-Russian...
Yes,
Robert Fico.
Yes.
Russian influence clearly continues to be a reality for this former communist republic. The Communist Museum in Prague charts the decades of brutal dictatorship under the Kremlin yoke. At the time, Slovakia and the Czech Republic were one country, Czechoslovakia, and life was tough.
Predovšetkým to bola absencia ľudských práv. To nebola sloboda pohybu, nebola sloboda tlače.
Like Vladimir Putin, Fico was a member of the Communist Party until it ceased to exist in the early 90s.
Right, this is also an important bit. Fico was actually a die-hard communist, as described by his friends, former classmates, and even members of the family. He was obviously born into communist Czechoslovakia, so it is safe to say that communism was the only thing that he got to know in his childhood and youth. And as Peter Bardi writes in his book about Fico, he was a really dedicated communist. He loved Marxism-Leninism, he admired the Soviet Union, and he wanted to be best and succeed even in the communist system. Now, that is not necessarily to say that he had been a communist because he liked the ideology as such. Maybe he was just motivated by the fact that he wanted to succeed, and in order to succeed in communist Czechoslovakia, you just had to be loyal to the party, because otherwise you basically had no viable career to even be able to succeed in. So, I'm not making any grandiose judgments here, but just to give you the context of Fico willing to sell his soul, so to speak, to a system that prosecuted thousands and thousands of innocent people in Czechoslovakia, that killed thousands of innocent people, and basically serve an evil ideology for his own benefit. So that is Fico. He was driven, as his friends and close acquaintances attest, to succeed, and he was willing to do anything to make that happen. That is important for what Fico has become and who he is in today's Slovakia.
Also like Putin, Fico's brand of populism includes demonizing foreign NGOs.
A každá takáto organizácia, ktorá je financovaná zo zahraničia, bude musieť pri každom svojom vyhlásení, pri každej svojej aktivite na území Slovenska uvádzať, že je zahraničný agent.
Right, again, an important bit. Here we get to the influence of today's Russia, which may be dictated by Fico's previous inclinations to Russia's predecessor state, the Soviet Union, and the regime. Because Fico, when he took power in late last year, he declares that he would want to introduce a law similar to the Russian and now, unfortunately, even Georgian so-called foreign agents law, which would basically stigmatize any NGO that receives any sort of funding from abroad. And just as politicians in Russia and Georgia, he falsely equated the law with a similar but not at all the same law in the United States, and said that, basically, if the US can do it, why couldn't we? That was his strategy to stigmatize NGOs. Why? Because NGOs are the ones trying to uncover his potential links to criminal groups and could be a danger to him staying in power for the longer term.
Fico má dosť spoločného s Putinom. Máme ale šťastie, že je to veľký vodca v malej krajine.
Now, even the Prosecutor General, whom we already mentioned, and whose power to stop any investigation in its tracks I mentioned already, even he seems to be an admirer of the Kremlin and of Putin's Russia, because just 4 days before the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Zelenka, the Prosecutor General, actually attended the anniversary celebrations of the Russian prosecutor's office. Now, the Russian prosecutor's office is the main body responsible and directly complicit in the fact that there's now over 1,000 of political prisoners in Russia. And he, the Prosecutor General of Slovakia, a democratic state where the rule of law should govern, went to Moscow and celebrated just hours before Putin decided to attack Ukraine. At a point where the plans to launch the attack had already been in motion. There was a Prosecutor General of a democratic country celebrating an organization that is directly responsible for torturing and prosecuting innocent Russians. So that's just your context right there.
The parallels with Putin are many. Like the Russian president, he portrays himself as a tough outdoorsman, flooding social media with posts showing his sporting exploits. And again, like Putin, he is often filmed with his dog.
Russian propagandists, they cannot wait finally that Fico will win elections and will start to fulfill his promises.
I mean, what are you even doing, dude? Like, I mean, you cannot give off a strongman vibe when you're not a strongman in the literal sense. You know, Putin in his best times actually looked strong. He gave off the vibe that he could actually do something. You're just big, you're not strong at all, and you still try to portray yourself as Putin. Come on.
But Fico's victory was a close-run thing. On election day, when the voting had finished, crowds gathered in the capital's main square. Exit polls suggested Progressive Slovakia, a liberal party, had won, despite a toxic smear campaign from Smer, Fico's party, to demonize the party leader, Mišo Šimečka.
Kým sa progresívny Mišo rozhodne, či je dnes chlapec, dievča alebo vrtuľník, pre nás je rodová ideológia na školách nepriateľná a manželstvo jedinečný zväzok muža a ženy.
So that is actually a great demonstration of how radicalized Fico had become. Because before the 2018 demonstrations that had brought him down, it is safe to say that he was never a voice spreading disinformation and Russian propaganda directly. Yes, he may have benefited from corruption himself, he may have enabled organized groups to take over the state, but he was never so active in the disinformation scene. But then with 2018 and the murder of Kuciak, something changed. And that something was the fact that now he was directly endangered by the investigations into his possible corruption allegations. He was actively being pushed out by the public, and there was a popular voice calling for investigations to be launched and for him to be put on trial. Some of his closest allies actually spent some time in prison themselves. To name an example, Robert Kaliňák, who is now the Minister of Defense of Slovakia and who has been his closest ally of all, he was in jail for some time. So Fico now felt directly in danger, which was likely why he got so radicalized.
Any populist, he needs someone to hate. That's how populism works.
Slovaks are very vulnerable to believe in various disinformation conspiracy theories, and what we see is that increasing number of political actors are realizing it.
Since Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian embassy has been engaged in a relentless disinformation campaign.
Right, and that systematic disinformation campaign by Russia unfortunately bears fruit for them, and that has been confirmed by empirical data as well. Let's take a look at the GlobeSec Trends survey, which has been tracking popular opinions in a number of countries in the region. We have a number of questions inquiring about the geopolitical stances of the populations in the countries surveyed, and I like this question the best to show us what Slovaks think and how they might be different even to countries like Czechia, whom you could expect to have very similar opinions as the Slovaks, just given by the fact that Czechia and Slovakia used to form one single country for quite a long time, but it's definitely not the case. You see, the question reads, whom the populations consider to be the key strategic partner. And as you can see, Slovakia chose Russia the most often. 27% of the Slovak population chose Russia in 2024, as opposed to only 8% of Czechs in 2024. And in contrast, a whole 41% of the Slovak population sees the US, who is Slovakia's lawful ally in NATO, as the biggest threat to the country. Only 17% of Czechs, for example, do see the US as a threat.
Over 5,000 posts on Facebook, reinforced by pro-Kremlin politicians.
We've seen various political representatives addressing people at public meetings, dear comrades.
This is Luboš Blaha, one of Fico's senior lieutenants.
Fašizmus sa vracia. Obliekol si dúhové farby, obliekol si rúžové farby. Dneska tu máme liberálny fašizmus a musíme ho poraziť.
There's a lot that I could say about Blaha, but it suffices to say that he has been an admirer of Putin. Just 4 days before the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia began, already at a point where Russia illegally crossed the border into the Donbass region and stationed troops there, so it was basically clear that war would start at any moment. He called Putin a peacemaker. He has been an avid Marxist, and he has been spreading conspiracy theories that directly benefit Russia, of course.
Vždy prichádzali zo západu a sloboda a mier z východu.
Right, what are you even saying? Like, peace has always come from the east. Are you insane? Czechoslovakia, so even your country, was under Soviet occupation for 40 years. There was nothing good that ever came from the Soviet Union. Are you deranged or incredible?
Many stories are designed to spread alarm within Slovakia.
There was an attempt to say that there's a radioactive cloud because the Russians hit some kind of military storage, and they tried to spread the narrative that it had nuclear weapons in it. Finally, a proof that the Ukraine has nuclear weapons, and that nuclear cloud was coming to Slovakia.
Again, just for context, it was Russia who has been shelling the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, who has been occupying the power plant for months, and who has stationed heavy military hardware within the power plant. So, if there's anyone endangering the world by playing with fire, with nuclear fire, it's Russia, not Ukraine. But again, Slovak politicians, including Blaha himself, were spreading such nonsense on behalf of Russia. So no matter what, no matter if you try to do it or it's just a side effect of your stupidity, you are actively helping the Kremlin regime.
Disinformation is having the desired effect. One survey conducted last May showed that 51% of Slovaks want a Russian victory in Ukraine. This despite ample evidence that the Kremlin is interfering in Slovakia's internal affairs.
There was a Russian spy who was actually sentenced. His name was Bohuš Garbar, and he was...
Now, watch this.
Was a contributor to one of the most influential websites, disinformation websites.
So he was caught on camera.
Wait for it. Oh, it's coming. It's here. Watch this.
Bribe from a military attaché of Russian embassy.
The Russian, sporting a baseball cap, is very pleased with his asset.
Povedal som v Moskve, že sú taký dobrý platec.
He then explains who to recruit.
Taký tvoj známy, ktorý milujú Rusko, aj chcú spolupracovať s Ruskom, aj chcú peniaze, aj majú také tajné informace.
The Russian was expelled from the country.
I mean, are you serious? Is this how Russian spies actually look? I mean, this is like a B-rated Bond movie. It's not even, you would expect this guy to want your change at a shopping center. Maybe that's a good cover, but maybe it just means that, they're not even sending their best into Slovakia to spy on behalf of Russia. But the worst part for Slovakia is that this is working. This guy actually gave 500 euros, which is peanuts, to the quasi-journalist to spy on behalf of Russia. And it worked. 500 euros is enough for some people to sell off all of their values. Incredible.
But the journalist, Bohuš Garbar, got off with only a slap.
I mean, calling him a journalist is a massive overstatement, right? He was running one of the largest disinformation servers in Slovakia. So calling him a journalist is an insult to every serious journalist in Slovakia, really.
He didn't spend a day in jail because he received a suspended sentence.
There seems to be a pattern of virtual impunity for pro-Russians. One of these is far-right politician Milan Mazurek, who received a small fine for saying publicly that the country's Roma community are like animals in zoos.
Just for context, this bald guy whom you just saw is an outright neo-Nazi. In the past, he was running the so-called guards that would go through trains in Slovakia and look for people who looked foreign and protect Slovaks on that train from the foreigners, even though they didn't do anything, they just traveled on the train, right? And he has been part of a party whose leader was convicted of a hate crime. So this is the guy. And in the past, Fico fought against fascists like this guy. But then, due to his radicalization, about which we already talked, he completely turned around and actually started protecting him. Take a look.
Milan Mazurek povedal to, čo si myslí takmer celý národ. A ak popravíte niekoho...
This is just one of many injustices against Roma in Slovakia, and Robert Fico in many times defend this injustice.
Right, so this guy, the neo-Nazi, attacks the Roma community in Slovakia. And then the Prime Minister says publicly on his social media that the neo-Nazi just said what the whole population thinks, right? So, one, it's not true. And two, you are the Prime Minister. You should be protecting and fighting for all minorities in your country and not defending a neo-Nazi.
Attacking the country's most marginalized and vulnerable has proved successful for Fico. So it's hardly surprising then that he should target another of Slovakia's minorities, the LGBT community. He has referred to pride...
It's really not going to surprise anyone at this point, right? Not only did he attack the Roma community, which is significant in Slovakia, and, they're voters as well, they're, citizens, but he still attacks them. And now he also started attacking the LGBTQ people.
Events as parades of weirdos. Cyberspace is awash with anti-LGBT propaganda and hate speech. The consequences are predictable.
2 young people were killed last year in 2022 outside a gay bar, in fact not far from the parliament. That would not have happened if it weren't for the rhetoric of hatred, hate and violence coming from Mr. Fico and the likes of him.
Right, the guy that just spoke is an opposition MP, so obviously for the sake of objectivity you should take him with a grain of salt, but what he was saying is true. The more you add fuel to the fumes of hatred, the more likely it is that a hate crime is going to happen. And no matter what, no matter if directly or indirectly, Fico has been spurring the hate in Slovak society and has been, making sure that something like that would ultimately happen.
CCTV footage captured the moment when Jure Vankelic and Mateusz Horváth were gunned down by a teenager who shortly afterwards took his own life.
2 innocent people whose only crime was that they were, part of the LGBTQ community were killed, were gunned down. And I'm not afraid to say that the government, with its hateful rhetoric and the active spreading of disinformation, helped to make that happen.
We were warning before the attack, if we will not stop this rhetoric, something bad could really happen.
Roman was not at his bar when the gunman struck. He rushed to the scene, where the police told him what had happened.
There was blood and it was like what should I do? Like, okay, I have to somehow clean it. So I took a mop and was just cleaning blood of my friends.
Unlike Fico, Slovakia's largely constitutional head of state, President Zuzana Čaputová, condemned the murders.
Zároveň chcem odkázať LGBTI komunite, že to nie vy sem nepatríte, to nie vy sa máte báť chodiť po ulici. To, čo na Slovensku nepatrí, je nenávisť.
When I saw her coming, it was like the moment like as mother is coming. It was like the moment she just started to hug me and I just started crying.
The president.
Well, Zuzana Čaputová is actually now the former president of Slovakia, because since June 15, Peter Pellegrini, a former close ally, or rather enabler of Robert Fico, has been serving as president. So, you know, if anything, Fico now has not only a clear majority in the parliament and wants to push through controversial reforms such as the law on foreign agents that we already mentioned, but he also has an ally in the presidential office, which means that nothing basically stands in his way if and when he wants to bend the rule of law in Slovakia to his own benefit, and he will do it.
Regarded as a liberal voice in Slovakia, has long been the target of pro-Russian social media, including attacks from Fico.
Before the elections, you've had manipulated pictures where she was inputted that people with whips and leather and spikes.
Fico's even accused her of being a puppet of George Soros.
He has taken over the narrative of Zuzana Čaputová being a foreign agent.
Čaputová is suing Fico, but few think she will succeed. According to the EU Commission's annual Justice Scoreboard, the Slovak legal system is one of the least independent in the bloc.
So two things. First, as you see, Čaputová was a frequent target of disinformation, of outright attacks by Fico, who at one point called her an American prostitute, which again shows you how anti-American Slovak society has become compared to societies elsewhere in the region. And the second thing that it shows you is how radicalized Fico has been, and he doesn't even stop at offending the president. And even if that means peddling conspiracy theories which are anti-Semitic at their core, because let's face it, the conspiracies surrounding George Soros, the things that Orbán and now Fico claim that Soros is somehow running the show behind the scenes, that he's the puppet master, those are anti-Semitic at their core, because Soros is a wealthy businessman of Jewish origin, and I'm convinced that if he wasn't, if his background was different, you know, the attacks on him wouldn't be as harsh.
Allegations of corruption and crime are not being pursued now. And we see somebody back in office who, you know, on whose watch a journalist was murdered.
Right, as we already covered, the Prosecutor General is, again, an enabler of Fico, and he can use the power given to him in the criminal code to stop any investigation, even to the government circles. There's been a leaked footage by the Slovak intelligence service showing Fico claim that the Prosecutor General reportedly promised to leave the government and Fico alone. So the connection to the Prosecutor General is likely there. And even if it wasn't, the fact of the matter is that the Prosecutor General has stopped any investigation into Fico. So after coming to power, after starting to peddle conspiracy theories and becoming much more aggressive, he has managed, be it directly or indirectly, to stop any investigations and threats to his freedom through not only but mainly through the Prosecutor General.
And we know now the journalist was investigating corruption and crime in government circles.
The murder continues to cast a long shadow over Slovakia, and accusations in the press about Fico won't go away.
What's Fico's attitude towards journalists?
He called us like enemies media. It's the word he used. Like.
And that's basically, I think, enough to give you a clear picture about today's Slovakia. Robert Fico is mainly driven by the desire to ensure impunity for himself and his closest allies. And for that, he's willing to do basically whatever it takes. He's willing to spread conspiracy theories, to declare his admiration for Russia, to surround himself with extremists, because all of that cements his voter base and installs him into power. And once in power, he then bends the rules of the system to make sure that he really is never going to jail. And that all means that Slovakia really does face a difficult time for the future, because its media are under constant pressure, the journalists, of course, the country's minorities face pressures, be it the LGBTQ or the Roma community, and the NGOs may be soon labeled foreign agents, much like the NGOs in Russia and now, unfortunately, even Georgia. We will surely be following the developments in Slovakia, so please make sure that you're subscribed and follow the channel, because there's going to be a lot more to discuss in the future. Also, let me know whether you like this new format of videos, or you would like me to stick to the usual stuff. Any input is greatly appreciated, so please do leave a comment, subscribe, and see you at the next video.